A lone spirit wandered through a sea of darkness, lost, alone, and afraid. It had no purpose, no shape, no form. It was just like the black expanse all around it. It seemed like the void was all there ever had been, all there ever could be. But, slowly, the spirit became aware that this wasn't true. Within the darkness, there was a single speck of light, a beacon that beckoned to the spirit. A beacon which promised to lead it home, back to the place where it belonged. Eagerly, the spirit started to surge towards it, moving in a way that wasn't entirely physical, while at the same time, it was. As it drew closer, the difference between it and the darkness all around grew distinct. The spirit first became aware that it wasn't an it at all. It was female, or at least she had been in life. Life, it had seemed like a new concept to her, but at the same time, it was eerily familiar. For some reason, she yearned for it, and with that yearning, yet another concept was introduced to her: emotions. It seemed unnecessarily complicated at first, but as the light illuminated her more and more, she began to see the reason behind their existence. Memories started to flood what she now recognized as her mind. Memories of friends, home, family. They were accompanied by feelings of joy and happiness, but also great sadness and loss. With the memories of her friends came memories of herself, too. She hadn't always been a spirit. She had been a pony. But not just a pony. She had belonged to a certain race as well. She had been a unicorn. But there were many unicorns, and each one of them was, in his or her own way, unique. Each one was an individual, with a name that suited them, and elegantly captured the meaning behind their existence. Hers had been Twilight Sparkle. The spirit finally reached the beacon of light that lay in the center of her universe, and she surged forwards at once to investigate. There was a sort of mirror hanging there in the darkness, showing her images of a world once very familiar to her. She saw her own body laying on a wooden table, limp, lifeless, and wounded. An incredible yearning overtook her. She longed to break through the mirror, to be reunited with her body, despite the shoddy condition which it was in. But that was impossible. Or was it? As a unicorn, magic was her heritage. It was her right by birth, and she had pursued it almost her entire life. In that respect, she was part of an elite, even among unicorns. Holding within her the potential to rise above her kin, to develop powers most ponies could scarcely even dream of. All she had needed was time, but that time was stolen away from her. She mentally assaulted the barrier between the worlds, but it would not let her pass. She wasn't sure if she was simply not strong enough, or if she was being hindered by the fact that her body was in a place that magic could not reach. She focused, and her eternal mind expanded in every direction. She wasn't going to give up that easily. She still had a score to settle. It is often said by sages and mystics that the body is a barrier, a hurdle one has to overcome in order to reach true understanding. Twilight realized now that this was true. Freed from her mortal coil, her mind seemed limitless and quickly expanded across the void, strengthening her will and broadening the basis of her understanding. Another beacon lit up in the darkness, this time inside of herself. It was a power she recognized and cherished, but which she thought inaccessible. She had been mistaken. There was a hierarchy, a natural order, woven into every part of the world, ingrained into the very fabric of existence. So, too, for magic. Nightmare Moon had wielded magic of the most terrible nature, and her followers had mastered those dark arts for themselves, easily smothering every inkling of magic Celestia's followers had brought to bear against them. But even they hadn't been invincible. Even Nightmare Moon had to bow her head before the greater power, an unstoppable force, in the end. There was no resisting when the elements of harmony were involved, and they were unequaled. Twilight felt her element, the element of magic, resonate within herself. She had long thought that the jewels, now held at Canterlot, were the true elements of harmony, and that she and her friends merely drew out the powers contained within. But now she realized that the reverse was true. The jewels held no power of their own. They were only there to guide, to channel, to awaken. They started the process, but in truth, they fostered the power within. It was all so obvious now. And with that realization came newfound understanding. The reason there were 5 necklaces and 1 tiara became clear. Their function was different. The necklaces served to channel power to one point, and the tiara unleashed it upon the world. In a way, Twilight and her friends had emulated a single entity, like Celestia, the wielder of the elements that came before them. They had been 6 pieces of a whole, but only one of them, with only one mind to guide them, hers. She unleashed the power within herself, sending shockwaves of magical energy coursing through the void. 5 beacons of light, almost impossibly bright against the background of complete darkness, jumping into the distance, and Twilight smiled. Even though the elements of harmony had fallen, their energy lingered, ready to be called upon one last time for one final battle. A wave of color swept through the void as power surged through the darkness, and beams of light connected Twilight to the 5 other beacons. Her spectral form almost burst under the pressure, but she was able to contain it all, and to draw herself within herself. It was time. The barrier between the worlds shattered into a million pieces, and Twilight Sparkle opened her eyes. Twilight opened her eyes, and the discomforts of the mortal plane forced themselves back onto her in an instant. Her body was still technically too weak to sustain itself, but that was no longer a problem. Instead of blood, pure magical energy ran through her veins, and her wounds sealed instantly by themselves. The weight of the fortress's magical enhancements bore down upon her mind, but it was easy for her to resist. The walls were directly connected to the enchantment, but they groaned under her incredible power. For a moment, it seemed like the fortress had the unicorn beat, but Twilight still had more up her sleeve. She dug deep into her magical reserves, and sent a wave of energy pulsating throughout the entire complex, shattering the magical enchantment once and for all. Free of restrictions, she immediately tore off the metal cuffs that had been holding her body in place, and got up from the table swiftly. The walls shook and shuddered, and pieces of stone the size of her head came down from the ceiling, as the ancient fortress finally started to act its age. Without magic to support it, the structural weaknesses that had built up over the centuries took their toll, and Twilight didn't doubt that the entire place would be coming down around her any second. She closed her eyes, and her mind expanded, searching for signs of nearby life. Her heart ached as she realized that the only living soul in the entire complex was her. Spike hadn't made it. She repressed her grief as she continued searching in wider and wider circles, filtering out the abundance of life sense she sensed in the woods, until she finally found the pony she'd be looking for, on the edge of town. She frowned. She had been out of it for far longer than she had realized. But then again, it was hard to keep track of time when you were a disembodied spirit floating in the void. She took a deep breath and winked away with a flash, as the entire fortress collapsed in upon itself. Her friends were long gone, but they had lent her their strength for one last time, and she knew why. They wanted Cheerilee to pay for what she'd done, and pay she would. It was already getting dark by the time Cheerilee reached the edge of town. She smiled. She had finally made it. The trip through the woods had made her quite nervous, as she realized how ironic it would have been if she got mauled by some wild animal on her final trip home. Luckily, there had not been a single one in sight. She'd have been able to safely make a detour through the marshes, where she had quickly disposed of the entrance crystal she had used to open the fortress earlier. Twilight had blown out the doors, anyway. She started whistling a happy tune, but got interrupted by a bright flash of purple light behind her. She turned around with a start, and gasped for breath. You're dead!" "Not quite," Twilight said mockingly, as she stepped forwards, her eyes glowing with magical might. "But soon, you will be." I'm not scared of you, Twilight. You were a fool to show up here by yourself. You should have gone for help, but now, I'll..." Twilight swathed her aside with a burst of magical energy, and the fuchsia-colored mare crashed into a nearby wall, groaning in pain as she tried to get back up onto her hooves. "I'm not alone," Twilight said menacingly, as she lifted Cheerilee into the air and pulled her closer, staring into the teacher's fear-filled eyes. "My friends are with me." That's impossible," Cheerilee managed with a grunt. From the way every breath caused stinging pain to flare up in her chest, she knew she'd probably broken a rib or two. She needed to get away, fast, but the unicorn was so incredibly powerful. Her mind raced, as she tried to come up with a plan. But her intellect failed her, as she sank deeper and deeper into a blind state of panic. Was this what her victims had felt? "Nothing is impossible with the element of magic," Twilight sneered as she threw Cheerilee towards the other side of the street, slamming her against a wall once more. Blood ran down the mare's face, and dark spots swarmed in front of her eyes. She tried to get up, but instantly toppled over again. Twilight pulled Cheerilee towards her once more, and the earth pony dug her forelegs into the ground to resist. It didn't help. She just dug or clawed deep grooves in the ground. Within moments, she was dangling in front of the unicorn once again, and she felt an invisible force grab her around the throat. Wait," she said hoarsely. Have mercy. I did it all for the good of Ponyville." Twilight glared at her angrily. Her face contorted into a snarl. Her voice, on the other hand, was calm. Dangerous is low. "Mercy? Like you showed my friends and your students?" "I had no choice," Cheerilee said, as she struggled against her invisible bonds, her face slowly going red. Twilight laughed maniacally, a sound eerily similar to Cheerilee's during her purifications. "Don't give me that," she yelled, enraged. "I know you enjoyed it, Cheerilee. You enjoyed every second of it. You liked watching my friends die. You liked stomping the light out of them. Out of me. Anything you say is just a rationalization for your own twisted desires. No. To save Ponyville, I need to die. Twilight finished the sentence for her, consumed by fury as magical energy flared up around her, illuminating the night. Ponies from the nearby houses started to become aware that there was something more than just two drunks yelling at each other going on outside, and the lights were turning on all around them. The two ponies in the middle of the street didn't notice, or perhaps they simply didn't care. Cheerilee tried to verbally justify herself again, but Twilight was out of patience. With a cry of rage, she rammed a bolt of magical energy into Cheerilee's mouth, shattering the mirror's teeth as she grabbed hold of her tongue, ripping it out savagely and tossing it aside. It slammed into a nearby wall with a sickening thud, practically bursting apart in a cloud of gore. Cheerilee let out a sloppy, gurgling cry as her eyes burst in her sockets, and cuts appeared all over her body. The storm of magical energy around Twilight intensified, winds swirling around the pair, sweeping up dust and small pieces of rock. Cheerilee screamed as her body got battered from every direction, blood streaming down her face, body, and legs, as her intestines got pulled straight out of her stomach. Foam appeared on her lips, and had she still possessed eyes, they would no doubt be rolling back in her head. Twilight focused all of her magical energy reserves into the other mare, attempting to tear her apart. It wasn't just Cheerilee's limbs which suddenly wanted to get away from each other. Every inch of her body tried to escape from the hole. You talked about weeds, right? Right? Twilight screamed, her voice contorted with madness. I don't know how much about gardening, but I know one thing. You reap what you sow. Cheerilee tried to appeal to the unicorn one last time, but between the pain, her lack of a tongue, and her rapid weakening body, she only managed to utter some unintelligible sounds. You've sown death across this town, so I hope you're ready for your Scarlet Harvest. The teacher wailed as her body groaned under the strain, and then suddenly she could resist no more. She burst into 1,000 pieces, splattering into every direction. A rain of blood descended upon the area, painting the ground and nearby houses, and Twilight into a deep hue of red. Little bits and pieces, likewise, got catapulted through the air, crashing into buildings and splattering up against windows, causing the horrified ponies, who hadn't been able to resist watching, to jump away in fear and hide inside their houses. Finally, the last bits of Cheerilee landed, and Twilight swayed upon her legs. She had used up most of the magical energy her friends had given her, and she realized she was, once again, at the end of the line. But she was content. Her friends had been avenged. The future murders had been prevented. Maybe she'd see her friends on the other side. There was no reason to linger, as a spirit this time, so maybe she could go and see what the afterlife was really about. She fell to the ground with a smile, and looked up towards the stars, as they started to appear in the sky. As she began to drift out of unconsciousness, she saw through a large shadow pass over her, like a cart flying by. She tried to shake her head, to get rid of the tricks her mind was playing on her, but found she could not move at all. Her eyes fell shut, and she felt as if she was being lifted into the sky. She heard a concerned, soothing voice talk to her, although she couldn't make out the words. Was that Princess Celestia? Twilight beamed. What a pleasant dream to leave this world on. Twilight found herself surrounded by darkness once more. But this time, it was different. Instead of limitless freedom, she felt trapped and claustrophobic. As if someone had locked her in a tiny box, barely big enough to hold her. She tried to move, or open her eyes, but she found that she couldn't, and it felt like a weight was pressing down upon her chest. She began to become aware of voices in the distance. That was odd. She was dead, right? There's little we can do to save her at this point. She suffered a massive hit to her magical energy reserves, an unknown cult said, in a neutral voice. Only a direct transfer of life force would do any good, but the amount required is... Take mine, Princess Celestia commanded. The cult stuttered. But Princess, the procedure is dangerous, even for you. And this unicorn, she... Twilight frowned mentally. Why was the princess there? Who was the cult? A doctor? No, he couldn't be. He didn't sound like he really wanted to help her. And doctors helped every pony, right? Then again, if what the princess suggested was really that dangerous, Twilight could see why he'd been reluctant. She was just another unicorn, after all. She's special to me. I see. We'll start preparations right away. She's coming too! A female voice suddenly shouted, panickingly. If she wakes up completely, the shock could kill her. I'm putting her under again. Twilight vaguely became aware of a prick in her leg, and then darkness swept her away, far from the troubles of the world.